Okay, here we go. This is Geometry 1.2, measuring segments. The first thing we're going to look at here is when we have two letters written together, like we have with these two here. This distinction here between these two is one has the line on top and one does not. Okay, so it's really important to know what this is really asking us for. So right here, when we have the line on top without the arrows, this is referring to the line segment S to T. Okay, so that's actually talking about this part of the line right here specifically. Okay, whereas if we do not have that line on top, we're actually referring to the distance. Okay, so what's the distance from S to T? Okay, and it looks like that's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. So we'll call that 12 units. Okay, so just a subtle difference there, so make sure we're paying attention to that pretty closely. Okay, and another little subtle difference here is the difference between equal versus congruent. You're going to hear congruent a lot throughout this year. Congruent essentially means equal, but it's just slightly different. So we have two different triangles here. One we have where it says AB is 4 centimeters and BC is 4 centimeters. Okay, so we know the actual length of these two segments. So we can say here that AB is equal to BC. All right, now this other one here, we have this part here. It says triangle ABC is isosceles. And we'll get into different kinds of triangles a little bit later, but an isosceles triangle just means two of the sides are congruent or this are the same length. Okay, so we know that AB and BC are the same, but we just don't know exactly what the measure is. But we just know that they're the same. So because we know that, we're going to say that AB is congruent to BC. Okay, that's a bad. Let me try that again. It's congruent to BC. So we don't know the exact measurement, but we just know it's the same. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. All right, moving on. Just a couple of vocab words that we got to go through here. A midpoint is the point that divides a segment into, I'm going to type this out, two congruent segments. Okay, whoops, there we go. Into two congruent segments. So if we know that congruent means the same, so they're going to be the same distance or equal distances, okay? So hopefully this makes sense. A is the midpoint of segment CT. Okay, so I'm going to first draw this segment CT, and A is the midpoint. Okay, so A is perfectly right in the middle there. And so the important part to recognize is that CA and AT, we don't know the exact distance, but we know that they're exactly the same. Okay, so what we can say here is that CA is congruent to AT. Okay? And a segment bisector is a point, a line, or ray that is its midpoint. Okay, so basically there, so it doesn't necessarily have to be just a point. It could be a line that cuts through exactly in half. Okay, so again we have KE, and this up top would tell me there's an arrow just going one direction, so this would be ray KE is the segment bisector of line segment JO. All right, so I'm going to start with the line segment. And let's see, the segment bisector, so if it bisects it, it's right in the middle. and I'm going to make this ray go in this way here. KE. All right, so there is ray KE. It is the segment bisector, and again, what we know about this is that JK and KO are going to be congruent. Okay. All right, so what are we going to be doing with this? We're going to be so we're not going to actually be looking at measuring these with rulers like you were doing in Mr. Tess's class. We're going to actually be solving some equations here. All right, so let's take a look at an example of this. So we have given O is the midpoint of DG, and it says DO is equal to 6x minus 7, and OG is equal to 5x plus 1. Okay, so what we know is because O is the midpoint, that means that these two segments are congruent. Okay, and I always like to label these on top, right above. So it says DO is 6x minus 7, and OG is 5x plus 1. So now we got to look at what we're trying to find. It says find DG. So we need to find the length of DG. So what we need to find is what x is. Okay? And so how can we figure that out? Well, if we know that these two segments are congruent, they're the same. So they're equal to each other. So we can actually set up an equation where 6x minus 7 is equal to 5x plus 1. Okay, and then we can solve this equation to figure out x. So hopefully that review last week of solving equations did you well. One little tip here with solving equations with variables on both sides. If you try to get rid of the coefficient that's smaller, right? We have 6 and 5 are coefficients. If we try to eliminate the smaller one, you're always going to have a positive coefficient, which will just save you the trouble of dividing by a negative to solve later. Okay, so if you can, I would always just try to get rid of the smaller of the two coefficients. So I am going to subtract 5 x's on both sides, doing it over here, so I got to do it on the other side of the equal sign. So we're left with 1x over here. I'm going to update the problem. Just going to drop everything else down. All right. And now I want to get x by itself, so I need to do the inverse operation of subtracting 7. So I want to add 7. If I do it on one side, I got to do it to the other side. So I'm left with x is equal to 8. All right. Now, a lot of students will circle this and then move on, but we are not trying to find x. We are trying to find dg. So we're trying to find this whole length here. Okay, so what we're going to need to do is substitute x back into one of our expressions. So if we do, I'm going to pick the first one. DO was equal to 6 times x, but now we know x is 8 minus 7. All right, so 6 times 8 is 48. Drop down this minus 7, and we get 41. So DO is equal to 41. All right, so now if we know that DO from here to here is 41, then OG also has to be equal to 41. Okay, now we can check that to make sure. We know that they're congruent, so OG better equal 41 as well, or we didn't do something right. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. 5 times x, which is 8, plus 1. Go ahead and solve. We got multiplication here. 40 plus 1. Sure enough, that's 41. So if this part here is 41 and this is 41 here, the whole distance is 41 plus 41. And so DG is equal to 82. All right. So that's pretty much it as far as notes for this week. I'm just going to include a lot of practice problems for these, but that's pretty much all we're going to be doing. So, okay, yeah, just good luck on the practice problems. I will submit another video with a little help on some of these practice problems. And then if you have any more issues, just meet me on a Google Meet. All right.